I think Putin was preparing for a temporary cessation of hostilities so he could regroup. And part of that, curiously, was his interview with Tucker Carlson, and it went terribly badly wrong.
People of my generation, boomers, remember the Cold War pretty well. Remember, there was a kind of freezing cold comfort in the idea that both sides were worried about the idea of mutually assured destruction. Don't have a nuclear war because everyone's destroyed. It was called MAD, mutually assured destruction. But now you're dealing with Putin, who's a murderous megalomaniac with no regard for life, including Russian life. And when you see this talk of a hair trigger, a nuclear hair trigger, it does put the hair on the back of your neck up.
It does. And when you see those headlines, any headline with Russia, nuclear attack, leaked documents, you think, as you say, we're going through all the fun subjects this evening, you would panic and think, oh gosh, what on earth is this now? But once you look into the detail of that report in the Financial Times, which managed to get hold of these leaked documents, and there are some vaguely positive things in there to be found. So many of the circumstances where they're talking about using tactical nuclear weapons is in a situation where someone invaded Russia. Now, at the moment, it's Russia doing all the invading. We're not in a situation where suddenly Poland thought, oh yeah, let's have a go, let's start wheeling
But there
our
were other
tanks.
scenarios too, John, weren't there?
There are other scenarios.
The loss of three cruisers, the loss of a fifth of the submarine fleet. That is not a Russian invasion. That's a setback at the outside of a conventional war.
And it is, but you look at what some defence experts have been saying about Ukraine, have been saying, actually, the threshold in the conflict in Ukraine would actually be much higher than some of these circumstances set out in the document, because Russia would be concerned that if they did start using nuclear weapons in Ukraine, that you would drag in the UK, you would drag in the US, and you would get a wider conflict. And going through these documents, or the people at the FT who've gone through these documents, suggest that that is something that Russia is very, very keen to avoid.
Well, certainly keen to avoid America getting involved. But again, one of these many scenarios is a war between Russia and the powers of Europe, on the continent of Europe. If that were to be happen, talking about a quick resort to tactical nuclear weapons to keep America out and try and bring about a quick upper hand for Russia. What do you think, Bethany?
I mean, yeah, this story, regardless of how you read it, is not sort of calming. It doesn't do great things for the blood pressure, right? Especially in the context of when we're going to have a general election and there's going to be a US election. We already know that tensions and the tensions around the discussions of Russia's war in Ukraine is, no one's feeling good about it, right? Yeah. The tensions are going to be high, and this shows that that's not changing anytime soon. I think the one thing that's interesting and really worth noting is that the documents analysed by the FT were created between 2008 and 2014. Yes. This raises a lot of questions in that how have they aged in the last 10 years? Has the threshold been raised at all? Has it been lowered? Everyone is kind of hoping they can figure out what's going on. Yes. And there is still so many questions. So whilst it is raising a lot of alarm bells and people are panicking about this, because as we say, no one likes to see the words like Russia and nuclear together. There's a lot more gaps that need to be filled before we start jumping to any conclusions.
I'll tell you what we need now is the view of a bona fide heavyweight defence and security specialist. And as it happens, we've got one of those on hand. Robert Fox is on the line, the defence and security editor at the Standard newspaper. Hi, Robert.
Can I leave the stage, please? I don't live up to that build-up.
No, trust me, you do. You'll certainly feel a bit of a bona fide expert for us at this moment, which is what we need, Robert. Look, give me your take. No leading questions. What did you make of this leak of this nuclear attack scenario?
Well, I follow your two fellow panelists. I think that their argument is absolutely reasonable and right. I think that this is a provision. The magic word is tripwires. That they always had this, and there was always somewhere in the works the ability for first strike tactically. And I don't think they're thinking of that now. But what Putin is really thinking about is how to prosecute his war in Europe and against the West, represented by Europe. And that is where military means are not the only ones. There is tremendous covert activity. There is a range of what Jack Watling of RUSI in a very, very evocative paper just last week called Lighting Fires all around the conflict area, not only in Europe, of course, but in the Eastern Mediterranean, Syria, taking over the port of Benghazi, for instance, in Libya. I think that we are beginning to see something like it's very difficult to parse the strategic thinking of Vladimir Putin, but this is where I follow the guru, the NATO guru, Stephen Covington. And I think there is a sort of plan that Putin has been engaged on since 2007, when he announced that he saw himself in confrontation, very possibly confrontation with the West at the Munich Security Conference. And I'm not saying it's a playbook, because there are many curiosities, particularly about what's going to happen in Ukraine. And I think within the next 4 or 5 weeks, I'd be very interested to know what our fellow panelists have to say about it. I think there will be quite big developments within the next 4 or 5 weeks in Ukraine.
Oh, we're going to throw it open. But when you say that, what specifically are you talking about, Robert?
Well, there's been excellent writing, The Economist, the FT, but particularly I would commend two great colleagues, David Sanger and Steve Erlanger, in the New York Times. This cannot go on because Ukraine is running out of ammunition, and there are stresses on manpower, and there needs to be a reset and a rethink. And I think that they will go to minimalist positions. And in a funny way, I just fly this as a kite. I think Putin was preparing for a temporary cessation of hostilities so he could regroup. And part of that, curiously, was his interview with Tucker Carlson, and it went terribly badly wrong because it ended up as being a farce.
Right, so interesting thoughts there, entering a crucial period. What are you thinking, John?
I just wanted to ask Robert a question. I mean, for the amateur pundit who doesn't have Robert's great experience and knowledge in this field, these documents what are they for kind of your average punter? They're something that's written and kept in a filing cabinet and is regularly updated? Or when we say these were written up between, was it 2008 and 2014, is this something that is likely still there and still applies? Or is it something that's constantly updated? What we look at being the case in 2014 is now probably long gone and long been replaced by a completely different document?
John, very, very good question. And I think we have to change the mindset here. This is part of what Russia would call doctrine, their doctrine of military science as it would be applied. And they have a doctrine for almost everything. As the late, great Sir Michael Howard, the wonderful historian and strategist, put it, he said the problem with the Germans going into the First World War is that they had a doctrine and a document for absolutely everything: war, peace, neutrality, working through third parties. And this is the thing that's going on. But you have to look what's backing it. The way Russia has pulled out of agreement for mutual arms inspections and so on, as you've both been spotting over the last 10, 15 years, from the intermediate nuclear forces, the conventional forces, Europe, and now, and I think they may come back in, they've temporarily ditched the vital strategic arms reduction talks. Those are about big missiles that can smash up continents because they're being blindsided above all by China.
Okay, Bethany Dawson.
One of the things I'm really curious about here is, with these documents, how much do we think Putin kind of is looking at this? I can't say I know the man personally, but he doesn't strike me as someone to read from a list of rules and go, we've made this decision and Ukraine have done this, therefore we're going to do this, or the UK have done this and we're going to do this. And so I wonder how much we need to, or we should be kind of really, pulling our hair out over these things, because my instinct about Putin is that if he wants to do something, big and dangerous and hair-raising, he might do it, whether it's in a set of documents or not. Maybe I'm completely wrong.
Robert?
But this is where I think the cabal of the of the Security Council, that what they say, and particularly here, something we haven't heard much about lately, although he is technically in charge of the operation in Ukraine, Gerasimov, the chief of the defense staff, and he will interpret, because Putin will ask for advice on this. What does it really mean? What can we do? What can we bring to the party? Because he quite clearly has been asking that question. over the last 30 months, I would think. What can we do with the deployment of nuclear weapons? So we've had a lot of bluff, not to say bluster, with moving tactical nuclear weapons into Belarus, for example. So they will be testing the possibilities within the doctrine. Funny enough, doctrine really does have a presence. It's not just a joke. Oh, here today, gone tomorrow, as somebody once famously said about a defense secretary here. It is there, it is embedded, and this actually comes back from this doctrine from Soviet times.